Alrighty. Hey everyone. Today, Kyle and I are joined by our good friend, Bryant Mathis. We met Bryant at The Edge, which is the startup incubator and accelerator in Tuscaloosa. He's been very successful in our school's business plan pitch competitions for his idea called Locality, which we'll let him explain to you all when he starts talking here in a minute. He's come in the top 3 for 2 years in a row, earning some pretty sizable prize money towards his business. We didn't actually know each other, but he ended up being one of my good friend's roommates without us knowing, so that was a fun connection. And he is one of the most passionate and intense people about his ideas, and he loves talking about it and sharing his theories about social groups and why his idea would be so beneficial to them. So with that, Brian, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, no problem. I'm glad to be here. It's fun.
Appreciate it. So the first question is, you're very passionate and intense about the things that you're interested in. I'm curious, when you were younger, maybe as a kid in high school or just as a child, what were some of your passions or obsessions or things that really captivated your interest?
So as a child, I always wanted to experiment on things,
Okay.
per se, and I never really actually followed rules. I just kind of took something and tried to be creative or do something stupid. And in my imagination, I said, this did this. I remember I took like a piece of styrofoam and colored it or did something to it once instead of the time machine. Like stuff like
Mhm.
that always preoccupied my mind as a child. And then as I grew older, middle school and high school, swimming was like my obsession. Uh, it was just so fun to compete and think about swimming all the time. But getting into college, that transition of no longer being an athlete, and then also kind of sensing that swimming in a way isolated me because I was having to travel 30 minutes for practice, and
Mhm.
none of my school friends were involved with swimming, and so I just kind of found this disconnect, and that's kind of where the sparks of locality came from. Was my
Mhm.
senior year of high school driving around. I'd messaged several people. No one responded to me, just because they were busy or whatever else they were doing, but they didn't have a chance to just go hang out for a casual like hour, 2 hour block. So I just drove around aimlessly, and then this kind of hit me. What if I could you know, find a way to connect with people easier? Because I could message an entire group message, but people typically ignore those type of messages because there's a lot of negative signals of saying like, "Hey, I'm super lonely. Come like join me for something." Even though probably there was at least 2 or 3 people that also wanted to go do something. So
Absolutely.
that's kind of where the idea for locality came through.
Okay. That's great. So
Yeah.
can you give a description of founding Locality? You started a little bit about how you had the idea, but when you actually started turning it from something you thought would be nice if it existed into creating it, could you get into that?
Yeah. So really, it's just kind of the idea was always kind of simmering in the back of my head all of freshman year of college. And then I did startup weekend and I realized I can turn this into a business. I was in the STEM program and I was trying to see, and it took me a while to find the right team, the right group of people. And then once I found the right people, it started turning into something real, not just an idea. And that's the craziest thing is even now that it's a real app, it's on the App Store. We're still finding ways to make it more real in the sense of not just the idea of like, this is how we're going to do it, of connecting people and making it easier for people to connect, but in real life, but that how do we actually get that to fruition instead of just putting it in a box and saying, this is what's going to work? How do we actually make it work?
Okay.
Um,
Uh,
and
can,
what situations does it work?
yeah, can
Yeah.
we back up a couple steps and explain just more what Locality is, where the name come from,
Yeah,
what the user experience is, what it's designed to accomplish, what it currently accomplishes, those kinds of things?
of course.
Yeah.
So locality is all about helping people connect in real life and in person. So, we all have, I think this is one of the big things locality looks at is that we all have people that we're connected to, but not our closest friends or even our closest friends, but we don't know everyone's schedule perfectly. So how do we connect each other in those instances where schedules fall through of we have some free time or we have something scheduled, but we want someone else to join us, but we don't know their schedule also aligns with ours. So the whole idea of locality is, and the definition of locality is people together in a location or place doing an activity of the same activity. And the flux of locality changes throughout the day depending on what people are doing in an area. And so the whole idea of locality was to try to capture that and help people link up at the same time when they have their similar interests and groups align. And so the functionality right now as it is you choose what groups you want to reach out to and then say, these are the range of activities I'm looking to do right now. and then it kind of starts things off so people can kind of join in or kind of start a conversation around going to do that. Particularly like closer to the moment is the goal as soon as
Okay.
possible,
It's
not
more
like
spontaneous,
planned
not
and more spontaneous, not planned, but hopefully we can figure out the balance between that.
okay. And you're telling us the story of how it got started. You said startup weekend. How long ago was that? Is that startup weekend 18, 17, 19,
I was like 16.
16? Startup weekend. That was your freshman year of college, or when was that?
Yeah, freshman year of college.
Okay, wow. And so how many iterations would you say you've gone through in idea and teams and
So I
uh
went through one team that we just kind of stuck together that weekend and talked about a bunch of stuff. And the next year I just kind of like didn't really worry about it because that team wasn't able to get anything together. So I just kind of like, focused really hard on school. And then about that time I heard about ALDAG, the business plan competition.
mhm.
And that's when I met Lily and Alex, and we got a team together. And then we did well, placing first in that competition. And then that's when we reached out to Ethan and got
Okay.
Ethan on board
It was your
and been working with
programmer.
him since. He was our developer, yes.
Mhm. That's awesome. So how would you say your strategy towards the business or your outlook towards it changed after the success in that competition? Did that make you more confident in it, or how did that kind of change things for you, getting some money to work on the project?
It definitely made me more confident in the sense that this is something I can accomplish and I need to put like focus and time towards. It always been something like, oh, I can make this happen, or it would be really great. But receiving an award kind of made me realize, okay, there is something to this, and there is a way to do this.
Hmm.
Yeah, how
And
much
so I
time
just
are you
kept,
spending on the project throughout the school year? Because you're in a pretty tough
yeah,
major with metallurgical engineering. So like,
yeah.
how are you able to balance that, or did you not, and you just did it in sprints, like for
Yeah,
ALDAG and then over the summer, that type of thing?
that was really my biggest issue in this last like go around, is that I didn't have a great balance. I just like the second I'd see something pop up, I'd do it.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of my issue, is I always kept finding things to for Locality to do, read about, research, or like work on, or hey, this isn't working out, or like look over the data and just try to figure things out and just kind of get anecdotal stories, which is from using it and talking to users.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, with metallurgical engineering, it was like I struggled last semester a lot because of the weird balance with it. Uh,
Let's talk a little bit more about the users. Can you give some
yeah.
examples? You said before we were talking before the interview started, there have been some successful facilitations of social groups and people hanging out through the app. Can you get a little bit into what experiences have come together from people using the app?
Yeah, of course. My the one really example that's been sticking with me recently is because we kind of saw not the great success we were hoping to see from
Hmm.
just people getting together at random by clicking some buttons and then seeing each other on the app and then going to do something. But what we saw success in was when people were already together in a group or doing something, then pressing buttons, then they go do something different together that wasn't planned,
Okay.
or they already had a social context, as we kind of call it, of social understanding of where they're going, that led them into a new context through Locality. And so my prime anecdotal story for this is I went to a startup strength event, and there was another group there called Spark Tuscaloosa. Uh, Josh Shahib, as you know,
Hmm.
is like kind of the leader of that group, and he got like a bunch of them all in Locality, telling them all about it, and they were just kind of playing around with the app, putting their names in, like hitting some buttons, like, oh man, I want to get some food after we get some drinks, and then 4 or 5 of us like hit that button and like saw someone wanted food, and we're like, oh, we're all hungry, and realized like it wasn't just a joke, we'd actually go get food, and ended up 4 of us went to get food together at Taco Mama down the street, which was not planned. Like
Hmm.
I wouldn't have gone with these people I didn't know at all if they just came up to me and asked me. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? So this kind of helped facilitate that. So we're trying to really find ways of how do you take a already known setting that people are comfortable with and transition them to a new one. And we think this like Locality can be useful for that.
Well, I think what you talked about there and just described actually proves a really interesting example of how that could work, because everyone on the app silently, kind of in their own private space, puts in, like, communicates to nobody just in a friction free way, hey, these are the things I'd be interested in doing after this, without any sort of social pressure of people wanting to do it or not. Whereas, like you said earlier, you put something in a group chat and no one responds, and all of a sudden you're the weird person who just needs to use a group chat to find people to hang out with. But if instead, in a very silence, kind of private way, you express, hey, after this, sure, I'd like to eat, I'd like to go do this, I'd like to do that. And no one doesn't really see that unless all of a sudden a lot of people express that same desire, and all of a sudden it's cool and it happens. So I think that's a
that
really interesting way to make more social interactions happen that everyone wants without the pressure of communicating that in a way that you might get rejected and feel left out of the group or feel negative emotional experiences from trying to communicate that in a different way.
Yeah, it's definitely a good thought, and like that's kind of the direction we've been trying to take it. There's some difficulties trying to implement this in a lot of ways, though. The current version, you can kind of see what everyone posts in particular groups that you're involved in. The original version we worked with, we called it based off reciprocity and the idea of like, that we both have to agree to terms before you're allowed the information. And so in that original model, it was like I had to choose the same group and the same activity for us to be able to see what each other were doing, which the issue of that is you can't see positive reinforcing signals sometimes. And then another thought, like something we didn't think about even, was that sometimes people are just going through because they don't quite understand the process very well, which is on us. It should be easy. Users shouldn't have to think or understand things to use it.
Okay.
Was that you go through this like funnel of choosing what group and activity you want to do, then you like end up with someone you don't really understand, like you're both there at the same time. And it's just kind of like you don't know what to do with that. And so it's like balancing those things of, how do you get a positive signal and also like understand why you're both there at the same time.
Okay. And I know you've got a lot of influences, a lot of people you look up to in the startup world and entrepreneurship, especially with iPhone apps and things like that. Could you get into who you've drawn inspiration from and how you've learned from them and some of the lessons you're trying to implement from their success stories into what you're trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I've kind of been recently thinking about is, success stories. And it's honestly just comes down to the people. This isn't a particular person, but you just kind of keep iterating. That's a classic thing people talk about. But I just think of like what Y Combinator says all the time of like, just iterate on what you're doing because you're going to think too much of this is my idea. And so I always thought about Steve Jobs a lot. He had like a great vision for what he was doing. I think the vision is important, but at the same time, you have to make something that actually works. And so that's kind of where we're at this point. But I've always enjoyed
like Facebook too. You really drawn a lot of inspiration from Facebook and Zuckerberg, and we've had extensive conversations about like group theory and all that comes in there.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, you're right. I haven't really thought about a lot too much of other people recently, so it's just not fresh in my mind.
Sure.
But I know, like, for example, like with Zuckerberg, it's always just really interesting how much he started focusing on more the psychology, sociology than you think he would have being a programmer.
Sure.
I don't think a lot of people,
and that's really
a lot of people actually had a double,
I was going to say, even like the Social Network movie, they really underplay that part of things from Zuckerberg, whereas you're kind of bringing up how, no, he was actually a lot more thoughtful of the implications of this in terms of social dynamics between people. I know you've done a lot of reading about the academic kind of theories of these things. Can you get into a little bit of some of those theories that have been really impactful for some of the, like maybe your reading list or what particular books or articles you've drawn inspiration from to set up and model the group behavior you want to see?
Yeah, so some of the most influential books and one of the most interesting books that comes straight to mind is How Behavior Spreads. Trying to remember the name of the author. I don't have it with me. David Amendola, I believe, is his name. I could be completely wrong. He's
but that's you definitely got the title, so that's what matters.
Yeah, How Behavior Spreads. Anyway, it's really interesting. And this time, with the coronavirus, it's kind of the funny thing because you never think about epidemiology much, but that's how people used to think behavior spread.
Was in the same way?
Was in the same way a virus spreads, right? Like just contact. But in fact, it's modeled much differently, and they call it the science of complex behavior, in which it takes reinforcing signals to get a behavior going. And so let's say the three of us are a group and we're always doing something. Let's say, you and Kyle start doing something, Lewis, all the time. I'm much more likely to adopt that.
Okay.
Than if it was just like you by yourself doing it. And that's kind of how it is. It's like some certain types of behaviors take more signals from other people before you adopt it. Kind of the idea of like Facebook or Twitter. It's like the more people that get on the service, the more likely like other people are going to use it, depending on how many
It's a
people
network effect.
Network effect, yeah. And so,
Okay.
but more in the sense of not just the effect of how you enumerate it, but also like, because if you look at the spread of Twitter or Facebook, they both went by like local areas, area by area. It didn't just start like
It
all these
wasn't
places
nationwide at once.
Exactly.
It was in
Or it didn't go
pockets.
from exactly, or it didn't just spread out to a bunch of random people and then spread all the random people from there. It was in pockets to pocket to pocket.
Okay.
And that's why Facebook went college by college at the start of the social network, because so they want to have enough density of people using it at the same time.
Okay.
And so complex behavior goes into that in depth at like a very academic level. The author is a professor at UPenn in like the sociology department, but he has his degrees in sociology and physics. And so it kind of brings that analytical mind to sociology,
Okay.
which is really interesting. And another book I like is a pretty well known one, Habits.
Mm-hmm.
It's The Power of Habit.
By Charles
It's a really
Duhigg.
good book. Yeah, that one. That's a good one. But it kind of talks on individual habits and then like organizational habits and societal habits. And then kind of understand the interplay of all those is important.
Okay.
And then kind of the last thing is, or not the last thing, but there's
Sure.
a bunch of other things to
Yeah.
talk about. Network effects is always interesting, and how you mathematically represent that. At one point, I got too under the weeds on that, and like
Chasing
really found
rabbits.
that chasing rabbits. Yeah, I'm trying to understand like how to model that and the importance of that, because I kind of realized there's a difference between quantitative and qualitative. By the time something's like quantitative, it's kind of sometimes lost its meaning in a lot of
Interesting.
ways. One of the best examples I know of that is the story of the Ford Edessa. I don't know if that's correct, or Essel. It's the Ford Essel. It was a car back in the 50s, and Ford was like, we're going to make the perfect consumer car. And so what they did was that they went around and surveyed everyone in the country, different groups of people. What's the type of cool car you imagine? How does it look for this type of class or whatever? And by the time they compiled all this information and said, this is what the perfect car for consumers are going to want looks like, it was a complete flop, because a year or two later, when they like compiled all that and understood it completely to make the car, the preferences and things had already changed
Okay.
within consumers.
So they
And
spent
so
too much time researching and trying to build the perfect product. And in that process, things were changing faster than they could keep up with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also plays into a lot of the iteration techniques, you're talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's true.
So you bring up a couple of really interesting resources. Could you talk about how you've worked in some of those ideas into your product, not just for stoking thought, but in terms of actually shaping your decision making about user experience and the way the product works?
Of course, yeah. So in terms of like network effects, and as well as complex behavior, we focused on groups as our core functionality, because we realized that's the best way to reciprocate behavior is groups. But then we also kind of realized that to get a complex behavior going, you need something to attract people there, so there's enough people. But we realized groups is a really good way to go to get those two things going, because if you look at a network effect, you can unlock more value out of a number of people that are connected.
Mm-hmm.
If you make more groups out of them, rather than just a media stream like an Instagram feed or a television of how many people are watching it. That's just a linear relationship with like the number of people looking at it. And then you have the two-way connections, like a marketplace of how many transactions you can make. And then there's the idea of how many groups you can make or make useful. And that's the most important thing, is you can make a lot of groups, but how many groups can you make useful and interactive and engaging?
Okay.
Because we're in different social groups every day. And so the whole focus was to make more groups that were useful to people throughout the day.
Okay. Like the subset of all total groups that are potentially useful. And how do you make that determination of what makes a group potentially viable from, the the total set of all possible combinations of the people that you're working with.
And it just comes down to how much people use that potential group, right? It's like
Okay.
self-determined in like locality is that you choose what group you want to hang out with, and then you choose the activity, and whatever subgroup develops from that is a useful group, is the idea. And so it's user determined on like what group is useful, because you can make any number of combination of people or things to do, right? It's just an extraordinary amount of like things you could potentially do with the number of people you can do them with, all a different result. But it's like, how do you facilitate that to happen large amounts of time and repeatedly?
It's like your end goal.
Ways.
Your end goal would be to like have groups that are created by locality. That way, like, you know that the users want to use the app and have used it and have had a good experience. Like, if a bunch of random people meet up to climb a mountain together through locality, they're a lot more likely to continue to use locality in other parts of their life, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely like one thing we need to work towards is like getting that positive user experience, then also like a call to action for that second experience. And it's just how do we route things in that direction to get that, going.
Yeah, like you're saying with the power of habit, if you can find a way to make locality the action. So if people, the basic structure from that book is cue, routine, reward, right? As the basic structure of a habit. So if their cue is some desire to have social interaction, you have to find a way to integrate locality as that action that they take when they feel that desire to socialize. And if that's what they if that's what they turn to, then you'll get them to continue turning to it, and it'll start compounding on itself.
Which is good, but that's the biggest issue right now. We have, quote competitors of, other social media platforms, right, that are focused around giving that immediate social hit. Instagram, I can see what's going on around the world much easier than I can actually going to play a game of basketball, and I can look at what's going on in the NBA. And so maybe a social desire is already being fulfilled. Another thing is just the activation energy of like getting to a place and coordinating things is a lot more difficult. But on top of that, another thing we've realized is, and this is another thing I've researched and learned about a lot. It's really fascinating. It's called Dunbar's number.
I first heard about Dunbar. Yeah. Explain it though.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I first heard about it when I was listening to Reid Hoffman talk, and then I finally Googled it, read about it on Wikipedia. Then I looked up some of his research papers. Essentially what it is, it's a number that is about 150, in that range of people, 140 to 180, 200. But typically 150 is the number, Dunbar's number. And it's saying like that's the number of people that we can consider like we have a real close personal relationship with, in a sense. And so it breaks down in different units. It's like the closest five people you're close to, like your 5 closest friends. And then including those 5 people, you have 15 like good friends. And then including those 15 good friends, and then including the 5 best friends, you have 35 friends. And then from the 35 friends, you have like up to another 100 acquaintances, right? And that's about as many people as we can kind of keep track of, in a sense. We can know more people, right? But it's how many can we like keep track of as like our social, experience as a human. And another thing that I found interesting recently, I was reading an article, I believe it's from the Atlantic, that talked about a psychologist that was offered a job of like, let's say a lot more money than your typical psychologist professor would make, a 6-figure salary, but he would have to move to like Moscow for like 8 months out of the year, away from his family, and he chose to stay with his family. And essentially, like one thing our brain does is kind of from his research and things he's learned since then, is that any free second our brain has, it goes to a system of thinking about our social relationships. Really? That's kind of what that's really what it is. It's our higher functionality isn't necessarily like solving problems per se. It's more about how do we perceive socially situations to figure out what's going on. Because the way we kind of evolved is like, is bet on like cooperation. And so our brain is always trying to understand the best way to navigate a social situation, from our perspective. And so, like, how do we best adapt to that?
Yeah. So what do you think some of the implications are of the massive usage of social media, whether it's Snapchat or Instagram, people using that in huge amounts on a daily basis with that in mind, right? If your baseline default thinking is okay, I'm not doing any problems right now, so I'm just gonna catalog and take an assessment of my social life right now and my situations. How do you think social media affects that compared to, more prehistoric, or not prehistoric, but pre-modern, more simplified social dynamics?
Yeah, it's definitely, I feel like we're always overloaded in a sense. And it's kind of going back to the idea of locality as well, where I was trying to get to, bringing up Dunbar's number, and I'll tie this all in.
Yeah, do it. Let's see it.
But Dunbar's number, essentially, that's kind of what issues we run into with locality sometimes, is that your 5 closest friends that you typically get most of your social value from, and then over that, your 15, those are the ones that you can normally just text and say, hey, let's go do something, and you'll both figure it out. And so locality, it's more about those further, reaching connections, or at least it was designed originally in that intent. And so it's difficult to kind of include those in when you don't have as much driving force in a sense to go do those things. And so we just have to reduce that friction a lot. And so when you can already meet your social requirements by, like, 3 or 4 people. But on top of that, social media has been easy and slash hard because you have unlimited access to, like, a larger range of people that kind of give you that, like, tail end, but it's very surface level. And also
Mhm.
it makes you think about and consider things that you might not need to think are important. So, like, do we really need to know what all the influencers in the world are doing?
No.
No, we don't. I mean, to some very, 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 very surface extent, like, it might be helpful in some ways of, a conversation starter.
Hmm.
But that's about it. It's a shared
Mhm.
commonality between people. But at the same time, there's just so much that we value socially that we sometimes just more distracting because of social media. And I think that's why sometimes, I know me personally, I've kind of seen it. It causes me to, like, struggle, with school focus and also, like, work focus, because I'm trying to find a sense of meaning and purpose or social drive. And sometimes I'm getting conflicting signals of what I should be
Yeah.
valuing.
Yeah,
Right. And I think, like,
I was gonna say.
that's what everyone's suffering for.
Yeah, that's what really draws me to like your idea so much. Is your end goal, not or one of your end goals is for more quality, real, in-person social interactions. Not like in your mind, just liking each other's posts on Instagram and having going back and forth in the comment section. That's not socializing. Or if it is, it's such a low value that it shouldn't even be really considered socializing. It might satisfy a short-term need, but in your in your heart or whatever you want to say, in your soul, you don't feel that deeper fulfillment that comes from actually being in a real group of people and being able to read people's facial expressions and communicate in those more pre-verbal ways that really are what contribute to meaningful social experiences. And you're trying to find a way to facilitate a group of people, meet with new people or your existing friends, finding a way to, in the margins of your schedule or just in casual, informal senses, have those higher quality interactions that actually lead to more long-term happiness and more deeper relationships on a more frequent and higher quality basis. So I think that's really a noble effort, and that's why I'm really behind it so much.
Yeah, it's definitely the goal is to make it much more real, because I think one of the things I've kind of learned, which just thinking about these things and also reading, is that honestly, social media seems more of an ego-based network, and that's why I think it's powerful and it's easy to get people on, is because it's about your ego in a sense of how your
Hmm.
ego fits into, your social situation, which is one thing we all really care about, is like how we define our ego socially, who we are as a person, our identity.
What do you want to project yourself to look like to other people?
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about us in a sense. But locality, that's why I think it's been more difficult in times, because it's not about your ego, right? It's not about pumping yourself up. It's about actually doing something which could be different than how you perceive your ego. And so that's one thing I've kind of found difficult, is it needs to be more about, doesn't need to be, but that's why I think social media is so, about your ego. Because the one of those interesting right now is the Until Tomorrow thing, because I ended up doing that just
What
because,
is it?
on social media right now, it's going pretty viral. Basically, like, someone will post a picture, like an embarrassing photo, and it says "Until tomorrow," and then if you like it, the person will DM you and say, "Hey, you like my photo? You now have to post an embarrassing picture of yourself until tomorrow." And so many people are posting it, and I kind of started thinking about it. It's like, honestly, I enjoyed putting, embarrassing photos on myself, because I'm defining how I am embarrassing, and defining that limit of,
Yeah.
Yeah,
this
you're
is me
getting to set
embarrassing.
you're getting to set your own boundaries on what an embarrassing photo of yourself looks like. It's kind of like the social media
Yeah.
equivalent of a humble brag. You know what I mean? It's where
Exactly.
You're able to like.
it's like this. It's a picture where you still look good, but like you're in pajamas, but you still look good. So like that's embarrassing, in air quotes. But you're still trying to say
But
my embarrassing is still super cool.
exactly, because I mean, like my embarrassing pictures was one of me, on top of a mountain. The other was
embarrassing.
yeah. I mean,
I'm so embarrassed that I do interesting things.
I mean, it was like you couldn't really tell it's on top of a mountain. It was like a really awkward face. And then another one I posted because I did like 4 in one post. Was me in a dress because I lost a bet once freshman year.
Exactly. So you're trying to communicate ways in
Yeah,
which you're cool and interesting with under the guise of embarrassing yourself.
exactly. So many people are posting photos that aren't like overly embarrassing, but it's like it makes you look more interesting. And I think that's where I see the ego kind of come in some places,
You
right?
need to include in Locality some feature where you can see how many things that you've done with other people. It's like
so you can
that would
flex.
be cool.
You need some like
Yeah.
You got to take advantage of that, whether or not it's a toxic drive or not. You can maybe find a way to link it into your app to get that same virality or virility of growth and usage. Because if you find some way to flex on your friends, like, oh, I'm so good at Locality, I've met 35 new people and done all these cool things, and I don't know, just some ideas.
Yeah, I think that would be we've kind of thrown ourselves around, but we always kind of back off of it because we got too much into the idea of like, being more about the meeting itself. But I really think you have to put people in an environment in which they feel comfortable. And right now you kind of come on Locality, and if you don't have a group or you only have one group, you kind of come into an empty environment. So it's like, how do we make that environment more welcoming and like captivating? Because I remember the first time I ever downloaded Instagram, which I will say is my favorite social like media. I just remember when I first got it sophomore year of high school, I spent hours just on the Explorer, just like trying to like look at different types of people and just like being so captivated by that. And so I think there's none of that when you get to Locality. It just feels very blank.
Okay. That's why you try to onboard groups at a time, right? Because
exactly, yeah.
If you bring on, like, for example, you're trying to get my fraternity, or at one point you're in discussions with, if you take on a whole fraternity at once, it's a really good target sample group because there's a couple guys that are really close in small little cliques within the fraternity, but everyone in the fraternity is at least vaguely acquainted with every other member in the fraternity, and they have the potential to get along, but just because of the limitations of in-person social interaction and existing methods, you're unlikely to have those spontaneous interactions with a smaller subset and have those cliques break out. So that's why I think, that was a really smart strategy, how to try to bring in groups like that at a time. Or
it's almost like it's like the same thing as with having a pre-existing event that you're tying it to. It's like having a pre-existing group and a
pre-existing context.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
that's where we realize. Yeah, continue.
I was gonna say, just in order to have that, natural progression, where you go from one event to a bunch of smaller events, which happens with pretty much everything you do, like chapter, for example, or startup drinks. It leads directly into these smaller activities.
And I think that's like exactly what you're saying, Kyle, is like that's the reason in the direction we need to start going more is you have a bigger event and you break it, and like we're the kind of key that gets you into those smaller events and make sure you have a smaller event. Because one of the issues we originally realized, like what Lou was saying, the idea of onboarding an entire fraternity, if we get an entire group on there, but it's at a moment when they don't have something already going, they don't have a reason to click all the buttons for that group at that time, like not everyone's going to want to do the same thing at the same time in that same group, right? And so, think about it, it's like social media, it's not time dependent, right?
Asynchronous.
I could post something, it has to be synchronized, right? Like I can post something like right now and you could look at it like 3 hours from now. Exactly. And you still get that value, right? But like if I wanted to go do something on Locality right now, like go for a walk, like if you check 2 hours from now, that's not going to help you out. And so that's kind of been one of our big issues, is just having enough people on at the same time to get that value. And so that's why we've kind of realized, like going from one bigger event, like a chapter meeting, or like what we thought about even like a church service, and then helping people, click buttons and go through like, what are we looking to do? Here are the small groups we're with right now going to do our next thing. Like that's what we need to kind of focus on, is that transitional point. And then hopefully once people kind of get the experience out of that, they can use it in other ways as well. But that's what we've kind of noticed, is that it needs enough people at one time if you just give it to a group without like an event already happening, they have no reason to reuse it.
Yeah.
And extending from that bar incident where we kind of stumbled into having lunch later or dinner later, that group doesn't have a frequent meeting time. They meet
It's like once a month, right?
Twice a month. Yeah, and so I don't even know if they met again after that, since I'd seen them, because it was like happened in like February,
Okay.
and now this whole thing happened. But it's like, you need a reoccurring thing to remind you, hey, we do this at this event, and you're not really going to have a reason to use it between then.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can find a regular event that happens where you can use Locality to spawn into little events. That'd be really good.
Yeah, that'd be great.
There's certainly a critical mass of users that you need, and a critical mass of like people that are willing to initiate social interactions in order for it to work. And I think that what you're talking about is these pre-existing groups, gives that a context to flourish within, like a group of people and a group of change makers, like people that are willing to put themselves out there on the app.
I think that's the thing. It's not just the pre-existing group; it's also a pre-existing activity, pre-existing event that's already going on, right? And so you have the two keys of I have my group, my people, then I also have like the thing we're doing, and then Locality can easily shift the thing you're doing and the exact group you're with into a more like a different one.
Yeah.
So.
One, to shift gears a little bit, one thing we haven't gotten into, which I think is really interesting about your business, a lot of young entrepreneurs kind of skip this step, which is something you didn't skip, which is what I think is really cool. And you might have some insight on is the patent process. I know you've gotten into trying to protect your idea. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with kind of trying to take ownership of what unique insight you think you brought into with this app?
Yeah. So when I had the idea originally, I was like, well, this could potentially be a patent, because I've always thought like if it is something that could work really well, how do we protect that? And so I kind of went into that. I just kind of like Googled around honestly and found a firm in Atlanta. It's a pretty good firm, Founders Legal. It's a very sporadic process, really. I just talked with my attorney, and he just wanted to make sure I actually like had something that was real, not just like some random idea. And then I've applied for a process patent, and the idea is, it's very cut and dry, right? Like if you get the same result in a different way, well, then I can't do anything about it. And we don't even quite use that exact process anymore. We might start going back towards that and implement parts of it, but I'm very general, but also very specific at the same time.
Okay.
It's like there are specific steps, but the things that they include are very broad. So it's like, you have like a friend group, and then like you go straight to like an activity, and they filter, or they like, categorize each other. And so, and I think it wasn't a bad idea to start with that, but it was a lot of like overhead. And getting it published, I guess, makes it legit. It at least is possibly patentable, but I don't know how much it is going to protect us in the end.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, but it is at least something that, like, if you're not it's something that's there, right? And people have to be wary of potentially. I do not believe I've been granted the patent yet. But if you Google patents my name, it will pop up
as the application.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm sure you learned a lot through that process, though.
Yeah, it was really fascinating. First of all, I realized like, you can write your own patent, but it's a lot. The one thing I did do myself is I had to work with an attorney to write all that. It was a relatively good rate I got, but the main thing is I did all the background research to make sure that there are no other patents that existed that like mine interfered with or overlaps. And I literally just went on like uspto.com and like Googled search like key terms, read those patents, try to get an understanding of them, and then like clicked to related patents that they refer to, and just kept repeatedly doing that until I kind of got a sense of like the space.
Okay.
And that was pretty interesting. But I will tell you, it's really difficult sometimes to read like legal jargon for like complex processes and like what they're trying to describe.
I bet that's not super entertaining.
No, but I think I had like a good enough scope to realize there wasn't anything exactly that we could like say that we infringe on. And if so, we have to defend the patent. But so far I haven't heard anything about that.
Okay.
So a piece of locality is connecting people over similar interests, like different hobbies that one may have. What are some of your favorite things that you do, like hobby wise?
Hobby wise, yeah.
Do you still
I
swim?
love hike. I haven't been swimming as much. It's more bringing the habit out of that. But locality would be perfect for me in swimming. I go swimming with remember Ryan and Zach from Camgene at the Edge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll go swimming with them some mornings. They'll just text me and be like, "Hey, we're gonna swimming like Wednesday mornings."
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm like if I'm getting myself up in time, like I'll go swim with them. It's been pretty fun just kind of like see them, hang out with them a little bit, catch up, and then I don't really like swim to exercise, just kind of goof around a little bit.
Yeah.
But it is nice. I do miss it a little bit. So swimming, that's a good one. And like that's what I'm saying. Like if I could have like a reliable like locality group of, and that's one thing I've also learned with locality is that it kind of hits on that spontaneous. But someone like you, Lewis, who is very rigid and like very disciplined, which I've learned is like really important. The more I've just kind of like continued in life, is that sometimes you have such a fixed thing that it's hard to just kind of switch things up.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're going to do something, you're going to do it. But so swimming for me is a hobby, and then hiking. I enjoy hiking a lot. I love going to the river walk, hammocking. It's a lot of fun there. There's actually a rope swing on the river walk that I don't advertise. I'm not going to, but that's a lot of fun.
Where it's at.
Well, I'm not going to tell you where it's
And
at.
a trade secret.
And I'll tell you like if you want to go with me one day. But I seriously like because I'm planning to go back to Tuscaloosa, hopefully within the next week or two. And I think Ethan's still there, and our plan is just to like do school stuff together, and then like because like we'll be like the only two people in town, and then go swimming like almost every day in the river.
Yeah, not going to be much competition after.
No,
touch on the discipline aspect of what you said. I will tell a short story about your team at Locality. So our first our first day at the Crimson Entrepreneurship Academy, we all did it together. Each person had to say one word that described them. I think I said like moving or something because I was busy. But Locality as a group, the three of them said, the first person said discipline, the second person said equals, and the third person said freedom. So I think that you're talking about discipline on this podcast is very in character.
Yeah, it's so. This is allusion to another podcast. One of Ethan's big role models is Jocko Willink, who does his own podcast. He's a really interesting guy. He was I believe, former Navy SEAL, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. But his motto is discipline equals freedom, and that's where Ethan got it. Ethan actually has a tattoo on his
bicep. Yeah.
On his bicep, yeah.
Now we're planning on having Ethan on in a couple of days. He'll probably do a deep dive on that and give us the whole.
He will go way into that.
We're gonna chase rabbits when we bring up Jocko, but that's okay. We like chasing rabbits.
He is a Renaissance man.
Yeah.
Ethan
straight up is.
Yeah, he does everything. He's awesome.
So those are some interesting habits. What do you think are some? I guess we'll kind of get into some of the bonus round questions now.
Oh wait, I also love card games.
You also love card games. What card games?
Card games.
Or what board games?
Trying to think. So there's a game called Secret Hitler. You played that?
Yeah, I played Secret Hitler.
It's so fun, dude. I enjoy that. I enjoy Exploding Kittens. That's always a lot of fun.
Dude, a locality for board games would be, or like group games would be pretty interesting.
That'd be good.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I mean, we have we can make a group for group games. We have the activity per se, but we don't have
a
dedicated group for it. We could make a giant, that could potentially work well.
Start building that out.
Yeah. But it's really interesting right now. It's like, we're all away from campus and like localities are helping people meet in person, but it's completely mute at this point with all social isolation.
Yeah.
it's so
locality is probably illegal right now. It should probably be.
It'll be a good time to launch though once this is all over.
Exactly. Maybe better itching to do stuff together.
That's a great point because I just thought it was really funny the other day. I was like talking to Lily and I was like, I can't really do anything at all. Like, it's like normally it's a great thing to do things in person, but right now it's like, well, nope.
Yeah,
Don't
and
do that.
you have to put in a setting on Locality that maximizes the group size of 2 people. So once 2 people agree to do something together, you just stop anyone else from joining, lock them out.
At that point. Yeah, fair.
At that point, it just becomes a dating app, though.
It does, yeah. Unless, you know, they're just really wanting to go like have a jogging buddy or something.
That's true. That's true.
You know.
So one of the questions we like to ask are, what are some just things that anytime you think about it fascinates you?
Really, like, one thing that just always gets me is like how much are we actually like learning or perceiving in a given moment. It's like, you know, like sometimes I realize like how I look at things is sometimes subjective and like totally wrong sometimes. I've just kind of learned recently, it's like you have to, the whole idea of like knowing yourself, right? um and that's kind of getting the whole idea of like how much can we better ourselves. And I've kind of realized like one of the best ways to do that is like learning, and like learning to learn, I think, is the thing that fascinates me the most. Is like learning to learn, like changes us, but
Like
also is like kind of what life's about in a way.
learning how to learn or learning for the sake of learning, or both?
Both, in a sense of like learning how to learn, but you can always learn how to learn better,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and adapting that skill. Because, you know, I kind of realized in a reflective sense of like always kind of looking back on myself is, and that's one thing I guess that captivates me, is like just trying to understand myself. But looking back in high school, I just haphazardly learned things. You know, I was relatively smart. Um, and I was able to just kind of like go through school by just kind of like happening to do well, like listening a little bit, paying attention. I never had to make an intentional point of how am I going to learn this material.
Mm-hmm.
Getting to college, it was like I have to figure out how to understand these things. I have to find a system. I have to trick myself. I have to learn the skills that I need to learn. And how do I best, you know, remember things, learn things, understand
Yeah.
concepts. And I think that's what some people don't realize, is that it's sometimes about how effectively you do something. Because, you know, I think like one of the things that was interesting with you, like, you told me this summer, was at the whole like 25-hour, you know, not 25-hour, 25-minute, like, you know, study session thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 25 minutes
Pomodoro
on, 5
technique.
minutes off, Pomodoro technique. Yeah. And I watched a video on YouTube the other day, and it was like a guy talking about not the technique itself, but like how in studies shows that your attention and focus just drop substantially if you don't give yourself a break after that amount of time. And that if you just stare at paper, you're not actually learning. It's not because you're stupid, it's just you can't focus. And then if you do that long enough, you know, let's say I study for like 6 hours, but I don't give myself a break, like my energy levels gonna be so low. And by the next time I try to study, I'm just gonna remember that how miserable it was staring at that piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. It's like, how do we kind of manage ourselves, figure out how to do the things we need to do? And that's always just like, because the answer is always different. The answer is like, but it's always the same. And like, there is a certain way to do things, but like, it's the result of like the different activities you have to do those things are different. But like, the rule they follow is always kind of the same.
Sure.
Lewis, I think it'd be a good time for you to plug Ultra Learning.
That's true. Ultra Learning. It's a book I read recently, and I'm writing a summary of it about 9 principles to accelerate your learning techniques and make yourself better at learning. The book's all about learning how to learn, about how to be more effective at learning hard things quickly, which is very valuable. And I think that's something, we didn't really talk about this very much. I mean, you're studying metallurgical engineering, but kind of sounds like you're really wanting to go the whole entrepreneurship and startup route. And what you're bringing to our attention in your last answer is one of the kind of unstated benefits of studying engineering, even if that's not something you want to do, right? From the process of attempting something very difficult in school, you're having very valuable realizations about, okay, how do I learn better? How do I become more intentional about studying in a way that's effective in terms of time, effective in terms of it's pleasant and not miserable? And do I actually have to be able to be confident and successful at reproducing this material on an exam or something like that? So that's sounds like even though you're not planning on becoming a metallurgical engineer immediately, or that's not your end game, it's taught you how to learn effectively, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, and that's one thing. This is actually a really interesting kind of like an anecdotal story I have as well.
Go for it.
And this isn't like down anything at all. It's just kind of like one day I was helping my like pastor's kid with his like math homework. He's like in 7th grade, And it's literally just kind of like different linear equations and like solving for X. And I was just kind of helping them go through and like understand how to like manipulate things in order to like solve for X. The next day I'm studying with a group of friends in the library for a theory of probability test. And another girl was hanging out with us as well. She was studying operation management, I think, OM. And essentially it was just kind of like, I was looking at like the problem she was like kind of confused about. And it was like, how do you find the break even point of like certain pieces of equipment compared to each other? Of like, each of these machines have different fixed costs, but then they have like different variable costs.
Mm-hmm.
And so like one machine might cost more, but like it produces like units at like a rate of like $10 per unit instead of like $15 per unit. And it's like, how do you find a break even point? And like the professor gave them like this equation that you just plug everything in, and like that gives you your answer between the two things. And I just kind of looked at it for a second, and I realized it was just setting them up as linear equations and solving for X.
Okay.
But they don't explain it that way. They explained it as like, here's this equation, use it for this situation. And it was just kind of interesting to me how I helped a 7th grader with one thing presented in one form, and then I helped a college student with a similar type of problem but actually applied.
Yeah, I think
and
that's
it's like, if you can,
I was gonna say that brings up like two really interesting points. The first is that's a really good example of transfer, right? That's kind of a good barometer for learning, is if you're able to be given information in one context and realize its application in another through your own doing. That's the real test of learning. And or the opposite point, right? If you learn something in one context and you're not able to apply it anywhere else, how does that even count as learning, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's one thing that people really discount a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. The second point there is how you're just trying to make complicated things seem simple, and that's a really valuable skill as well. You're trying to take all these complicated academic theories about socializing and group dynamics and just breaking it down into clicking buttons and people ending up hanging out. Or someone presents needlessly complicated equations to discuss supply chain and operations management, when really, if they just taught it in terms of 7th grade math, everyone would understand what's going on immediately.
Exactly, because
that's
the second
a
I
really
told
interesting
her,
story.
Yeah, the second I told her, look, it's just like you were doing in like math. It's you just make it and solve for X, and she like understood immediately. And it was just kind of like, if you kind of extrapolate out like the basics, sometimes it's confusing to people.
Yeah, it's great.
I think that's a problem with business education too, is that it's less about teaching you how to think and more about teaching you how to follow a process.
Yeah, which is sometimes like I've kind of learned there is a like a good thing sometimes of following a process, but then there's also you need to understand that process.
Yeah.
But you have to do both in a way. You have to. So I think that's one thing I've struggled with, is like I always try to understand everything instead of just like doing it.
Yeah, it's super valuable.
Yeah, but at the same time, it is valuable. Sometimes it sets you behind if you spend too much time trying to understand something instead of just getting it done. And then there's a balance. And I'm taking this from another podcast I heard between, actually it was Jocko and Jordan Peterson. But it is like one of the most like eye-opening kind of like things to me. It's like, just play the game, right? It's like sometimes like you're in a situation and like you can see there's better things to do in that situation, or there's a higher purpose or goal. But sometimes you have to play the game and just kind of like go at it. And then like once you get to a certain point, you have enough resources or like whatever you have or need to then start making those changes. And so, it's like sometimes you just have to, play the game. Because sometimes I spend so much time studying and trying to understand a concept rather than just like, working a bunch of problems, and because there's understanding in problems. But I know like a lot of times in engineering, you can just like look at the formula several times and then just figure out the exact way to set the formula up and then, run through it, instead of understanding, why am I setting up this way? Like, what has happened when I manipulate it this way? And like, what does that mean? And there's so many times
I think
I was able to do,
I was gonna say, I'm gonna challenge you a little bit on that, because I sometimes, my tendency is to play the game a little too much and like only play the game, because in certain academic contexts you can totally do fine and get A's and get hundreds on tests just playing the game if you play the game well enough. Like WebAssign, just the math on there, the classic examples. You try another version, it just changes the colors in red of the numbers in the equation. You do try another version enough times and you realize that the answer just is going to be 3 times the first red number times the next red number. Then you don't learn any of the process. So it's definitely, so playing the game is good for certain contexts, but I think you're better off for actually taking the time to understand things, even if it's more time consuming, not always the most efficient in the moment. Like you said, through doing that, you're expanding your capacity as a learner to be able to learn harder things in the future and come to solutions on your own. So I don't know if I agree.
Well, I think that what he's talking about specifically in that podcast from Jocko,
and I haven't
George
listened to it,
is not, well,
Yeah.
I haven't either, but I'm extrapolating. It's not about academic settings. It's about like life. You know,
bureaucracy.
if you have to wake up at 6 a.m. and drive across town, don't lose 5 hours of sleep thinking about how you have to get up at 6 a.m. and struggling with that.
Yeah.
Just play the game. Like, get up, discipline equals freedom. Just like we were talking about earlier.
What town takes
And
5
even
hours to
within that-
drive across?
You're right about
LA
that.
probably.
Bad.
Nah, I'm just messing with you.
I know you are.
Oh, sorry, my AirPod died.
That's fine.
You're good.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're still fine. You're good.
Okay, cool. So, like one thing is that playing the game as well, Lewis. It's like, think about it this way: if I spend so much time on my homework, because I have 4 or 5 different classes I have to deal with, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's faster for me to just get my homework done, then that's good. But I also do need to learn the things. But if I spend all my time trying to understand everything to a super deep level, I won't get all my work done.
Yeah, you have to play the extent.
Exactly. You have to play. You have to balance everything. So it's not just playing the game, or it's not just understanding. It's like you have to manage both. And if you do them in balance, it'll elevate, I think, both skills.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like you and I represent the two
weighed
extremes
down
of
by
that.
the lack of one thing that you've done or not.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it seems like you and I represent the two extremes of that. My tendency is just to play the game and not learn the material in a deeper, meaningful sense until the last minute, when yours is try to learn it right away because you're just intellectually curious about doing so, and then struggling to just finish everything because you took 3 days to learn it. But
and I'm a perfect.
And that's what's frustrating, because sometimes
Kyle's the perfect balance. Kyle's the perfect middle child. Kyle's got the perfect allocation of time spent tinkering and figuring things out, and time spent just looking for the answers on Quizlet or whatever.
Perfect.
Get it done.
Thanks, Lewis. I appreciate that.
Yeah. But that's because you're an accounting major, so I mean.
Yeah.
Kyle, this is a fun question for Bryant. If you could ask for any advice from any historical, or if you could ask advice from any historical figure, who would it be, and what would you ask them?
Oh goodness.
Living or dead.
Okay, well, living or dead.
Well, there's
let's just say dead.
Wow.
All right, we'll just limit it to dead.
Holy.
Past 100 years, let's say.
Yeah, there's one person that jumps to mind immediately, but I don't know if that's who I want to answer.
Say it.
But
we're gonna go with
Benjamin
him for
Franklin.
today. Okay.
Yeah,
dude, that was a very good answer for me and Lewis.
We do like Ben Franklin
really?
here. Oh yeah, big Ben Franklin fans.
Tell me why.
Kyle, go for
it. We both have read most of his autobiography, and I was obsessed with him before just because of the man literally invented America.
That's what I was gonna say.
He saved the American Revolution. Pretty much, you can accredit. I don't even know what the percentage of it is to him, but the reason we won is because we had French support, and he's the reason that we got French support.
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't know, just reading that biography and the way that he thinks and how far ahead of his time he really was, it's just mind blowing.
He's always been fascinating to me. As a little kid, he was my favorite founding father. I had my mom read me every single book on him that we could find, including the autobiography, which I need to reread those things because I was probably 7.
It's free, public domain.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely need to read over it. But I just remember because there's a family story, and I think it's a little bit legitimate because my dad's done some more digging, that we're actually related to Benjamin Franklin, way down the line. My dad recently was just in North Carolina looking around, and he found a grave because our family comes from that area.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Jonathan, brother of I don't remember if it was Jonathan. I don't think it was him, but it was another brother because he had 13 siblings. Yeah. And it was
he was the youngest.
he was the youngest. And then it's like Jonathan, like, you know, Franklin, of like brother of Benjamin of American fame. So like I could potentially be related to like that extended family somewhere.
Oh my goodness. Well,
Or at
there you
least it's
go.
like,
what would you
yeah.
ask?
Man, I was just kind of like, how would you? He just was so interesting in the way of like how he thought about things, exactly what you were saying.
Yeah.
Like my favorite story, I remember, it could be an autobiography. I'm trying to remember.
That's all right.
I think this is a real story. It was the story about how in grade school they were like taught to memorize like certain phrases in Latin, and then he had like a really good friend that like struggled with it a lot, and he like helped him learn his like phrase. And the teacher, when Benjamin went up to recite his phrase in Latin, the teacher called out his friend's phrase instead of like his own phrase. So like instead of like just saying what he knew because he'd helped his friend study, he just kept quiet because the teacher got it wrong and got in trouble because the friend wouldn't have been ready. And that's not necessarily the question I'd ask, but I guess the question I'd ask would probably be
how to set
like,
up the user funnel for Locality.
Maybe, yeah. No, but for real though, it'd be like, you know, how did you go about like balancing, like kind of what we were talking about earlier? It's like balancing, you know, all your thinking, all your experimenting and playing around, right? Because he honestly just played.
Mm-hmm. He was very
like
playful.
different things. Yeah, he was experimental, but he also got results out of his experiments. Like, and I feel like sometimes one of the reasons it might be difficult today is to get something out of thought is because, you know, the levels and the complexity that all of us are now thinking are much deeper than it used to be, right? Like, not deeper, but in the extent of like nowadays, like, you know, we're playing with atoms. That's the new frontier, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not we're playing with like concepts anymore.
A lot of the hard stuff has been figured out already.
Yeah, that's a good way.
So the only new stuff to figure out is even harder.
And like back then, you know, people were worried about tilling their fields, and like, you know, we have a lot easier lives. So we're left with a lot more time to think about this and that versus, all right, well, I have to go wake up and plow this field with my oxen. Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah,
it's a lot different.
A lot of the reason he was able to do that and be so playful and inventive was he was retired very early in his career. So he had that, 30, 40 years of productive retirement to build and invent and create social groups. But that's enough on Ben Franklin. Check out his autobiography. It's in the public domain. You can get it on Apple iBooks for free. Anybody, worth a read for sure. Kyle, do you have a question? I got a bunch here, but I don't know what to ask.
I think maybe we should go through coronavirus, but also I want to know how you like your coffee.
Oh, my coffee?
Yeah. We've been to coffee shops before, so I should know this as your friend, but I don't.
Oh, yeah. So if I'm making my own coffee, I just like black with a little bit of cream. But if I go somewhere, I'll get a white chocolate mocha with like half the white chocolate mocha, like the white chocolate syrup, and like half sweet. It's like I like the taste of it, but it's like way too sweet. So I just like want a lot of coffee with a little bit of that syrup in it, basically.
That might be a move.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Those things are always so sweet.
Yeah, well, Kyle, you got the coronavirus question loaded up?
Not necessarily any question, but I would like to talk about it with you, just because I haven't seen you in a while, and it's kind of the most pressing event that's happening in the world right now.
Yeah, it is.
What's it like where you are? You're where right now? In Georgia, I'm assuming?
I'm in Georgia, in my hometown. There are 9 confirmed cases of coronavirus publicly, but we know some people who work at the like hospital and stuff. They're like friends, and they're at least 2 or 3 doctors.
This, just so you know.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, this doesn't count. Like it's not reported to who, right?
Yeah.
We've got a pretty large listening base already. Some high up offices.
Yeah, I didn't think about how nobody's gonna listen.
Anyway, so it's like those like a few doctors that aren't reported in like listings yet, at least. But also like here it's not too bad. One of the biggest issues is like people aren't actually quarantining themselves. We live in a not
adherence
super
is really low.
Educated. Yeah, like not everyone's super well educated here. So because like we had someone come to my dad's office and like drop stuff off, and like we handed it to him. Like he stood outside the door, we handed him the stuff, but it was like he was saying, like, over at Home Depot, like, there are just like dozens of people there because they're off work now and they want to like work on stuff, so they're just all crowding Home Depot. Not.
That sounds like a stock tip.
Yeah, dude. Honestly, I'm so mad at myself because, like, if I had been like not paying attention to school, I would have had the epiphany of like I should invest in like video game companies.
Yeah, or Zoom.
Yeah, or Zoom. Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, no.
So
Coronavirus just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to come of this? What consumption patterns will change? How will the world change long term? If you know anything about the economic stimulus package, what do you think about that?
I don't know enough to comment, but I will say this is kind of going a little backwards because you're saying like how are things going to change? Well, this is something in a retrospective way. It's like if you look back at history of other plagues and other things, you just let everyone die. This is kind of the first time society has said we're going to stop economic production, right? We're going to slow it down to save 1 to 2% of the population of people, right? That's pretty amazing if you think about it, that we are willing to stop everything to save like 1 to 2% of the population, which is a lot of people. Like, don't get me wrong, that's a huge number of people.
No, but historically, it's just let them die.
Exactly. Historically, it's let them die. We have to support ourselves. We have enough now that we can continue on without focusing on production.
Well, I think that the argument is not that 1 to 2% of people won't die in the end. I think that the stopping of the economy is so that the medical like field just doesn't get absolutely obliterated by like a mass influx of people needing attention. And
exactly.
So,
but that's definitely interconnected, because the reason we want to stop that from happening is to prevent massive amounts of people from dying. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Because like if the medical companies and hospitals get over flooded, right? Well, they can't properly care for everyone and they'll die.
Yeah.
Which is just really interesting to think. It really is just a numbers game. It's like if we can forestall this, we'll have enough room for people to be healed.
Yeah, we'll
or
see
at least receive proper care per se.
Mm-hmm. We will see how it plays out.
Yeah.
Kyle, that's all I had. I think this was a very fun conversation. We always love chatting with you. We'll have to go to the Riverwalk, go for a jog, go swimming, do some sort of spontaneous activity together in Tuscaloosa. Get some white chocolate mochas. Half sweet, no sweet.
Yeah, I'm just hoping to get everything back to normal sooner or later, but it's probably going to be at least until August. This is going to be normal.
Yeah. I don't know if our current idea of normal will be ever returned to, or if we'll have permanent cultural differences. I think it'll be like open.
I will say this that I've observed, that we're kind of going back to Kyle's question, like what are habits that are changing? Like I have noticed in a sense, like there is a bigger sense of community that I really enjoyed. Like I feel like I've talked to my neighbors more, and my parents have said kind of the same thing of like we've actually talked to our neighbors more, like we're waving at each other from across the lawn or stuff like that, but we're still talking. And when I go on a walk around the neighborhood, I'm waving at everybody. Everyone seems more accepting to like do that.
Yeah, right? That's nice.
And it's just really interesting. I'm really happy about that.
Rallying around a common enemy always brings people together, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's just a great thing that this is hopefully going to do for our country. It's been so divided in a lot of ways that hope kind of get people to be like, we care about each other again.
Yeah, completely. Well, thank you so much, Brian. This was
it was a lot of fun, guys.
Thank you for joining us. Best of luck with Locality. Hit us up if you want some user feedback and all that good stuff.
That was awesome.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you all.